Hi, it's Miss House. In this lesson, lesson 10, we're going to have an introduction to algebra, and there are only two quick concepts that we'll cover here. First, we'll do a few translations from English to algebra, and then we'll learn the difference between the terms, the actual term is terms, and factors. So here is number 1. Write the below statement using an algebraic notation. So we're asked to do 9 times B times A. Now there are several ways to write this. As you see there, I've done it with the dot. You could also do it with parentheses. That would be correct. But in this case, it would be just as easy to write 9BA because that means 9 times B times A. And you might see that written in alphabetical order, 9AB. And that's probably the best answer that we could write is 9AB, but any of those should be acceptable on a test or in my math lab. Number 2, write the below statement using algebraic notation. B plus n times B minus n. Well, in this case, since it's already in parentheses, I think the best way is just to leave those parentheses, and that will mean to multiply B plus n times B minus n. And again, we can put these factors in any order. And that's what we're going to be talking about in just a minute, and that is factors, which mean that we have some numbers or variables that are multiplied. Number 3, write the below statement using algebraic notation, n plus 2 divided by 4n. So there would be a couple of acceptable ways to do this. You may use the division key, and you put parentheses around the 4n in this format. Another way would be to use the division bar, so n plus 2 divided by 4n in that manner, and that is also equivalent to n plus 2 divided by 4n. But I think it's always safest if you leave those parentheses around that binomial, because that indicates that you need to leave the n plus 2 together, and you don't do something with those n's like try to cancel them out or that 2 into that 4. That n plus 2 has to stay intact like that. So any of these would be acceptable notations. N plus 2 in parentheses over 4n is probably the most desirable one. Example 4, for the algebraic expression 2x minus 5y, tell whether y is a term or a factor. So we said earlier that factors are multiplied. Terms are added or subtracted. Now, you can have a factor that is part of a term like we have here. Notice that's 2x, so that's a factor. And x is a factor because those are being multiplied. But it's also a term because it is involved in a subtraction with 5y. It also has two factors. The 5 is a factor, and the y is a factor. So ask yourself, are they asking me for the whole thing? That would be a term. Or are they asking me for part of the term? That would be a factor. So y is a factor. Number 5, for the algebraic expression 3n to the third minus 2mn, tell whether 3n to the third is a term or a factor. So look, again, the test is it the whole thing, which will be a term, or is it part of it, which would be, say, for example, that n right there is a factor. So since they're looking for the whole thing that's being either added or subtracted, look, we got subtraction here. 3n to the third is a term because the whole thing is being added or subtracted. Number 6, for the algebraic expression 2abc plus d, tell whether 2abc is a term or a factor. So once again, we're looking at the whole thing, and that's going to make it a term, and the other term is d because it's being added. Okay, so again, this whole thing is a term because the whole thing is part of an addition. Now, if they ask us for any of these individual numbers or letters, each one of those are factors. Number 7, for the algebraic expression 3y times parentheses 5y squared minus 7, close parentheses, tell whether y squared is a term or a factor. Now look, this time the y squared is only part of that. It's being multiplied. Therefore, it is a factor this time and not a term. The term would be the whole thing that's being added or subtracted, but this is part of a term, which is a multiplication. So there we have a factor. Example 8. Write the below statement using algebraic notation. 8 times y times x. So again, we said you could go 8 dot y dot x. Now here's where you really want to avoid the old-fashioned 8 times y times x, because look how confusing that these times, and I know sometimes they even write them a little different like this, and so the x's look a little different. It's still too confusing to have x's within x's, so we definitely want to avoid using x's for times. We can use the dot. We can put each one in parentheses, or we can just write them consecutively in order like that, 8yx, and in alphabetical order, it would be 8xy. So any of those are correct. This would be probably the most preferable answer that you could give. Example 9. Write the below statement using algebraic notation. Again, we have a plus n times a minus n. So a plus n parentheses a minus n. That's going to mean to multiply. You could insert a dot in between, but it's not necessary as long as you keep those expressions in parentheses. And those are actually called binomials because they have two terms. Remember, two things that are being added or subtracted. That's what we have there. Example 10. Write the below statement using algebraic notation. N plus 6 divided by 8n. So n plus 6 divided by 8n. You put parentheses around the 8n. Probably the preferable way to write this is n plus 6 over 8n, and I want you to just keep those parentheses around that expression because it keeps you from doing something that would be wrong, like trying to cancel out those n's. That would be incorrect, so we don't want to do that. That n plus 6 is these two terms, a binomial that have to stay together. You can't separate them. So n plus 6 divided by 8n. It's probably our best format for that answer. For the algebraic expression 4x minus 9y, tell whether x is a term or a factor. So you look at this and you say, is it the whole thing or is it part? It's just part of a multiplication, therefore it is a factor. Now 4x is a term. X is one of the factors. The other factor is 4. Because those are the things that are being multiplied. Example 12. Is into the third a term or factor? I think we had one almost just like this or just like this. Look, into the third again is part of it. It's going to be a factor because it's multiplied. 7ABC plus D. Well, that's the whole thing. So that's a term. And number 14, 2y squared. 2y squared is the whole thing. So it is going to be also a term. So let's break this one down more just as a review. We've got 5y is a factor. Because look, it's not being added to 2y squared minus 3. It's being multiplied. Now within 5y, 5 and y are also factors. Why? Because they're being multiplied. Now 2y squared minus 3, the whole thing, is a factor. And the reason it's a factor is it's being multiplied. What is it being multiplied by? 5y. Within 2y squared minus 3, there are two terms. Term 1 is 2y squared. Term 2 is minus 3. And you got to keep that sign with it, okay? So term number 2 is the minus 3, including the sign. Let me write that down underneath here so it doesn't look like 2 minus 3. So term 1 is 2y squared, and term 2 is minus 3. And look, 2 is a factor, and y squared is a factor within that first term of that polynomial.